There was neither non-existence nor existence then. These words, composed over 3,000 years ago on the banks of the Sarasvatī, may be the most audacious question ever asked by the human mind. Not a prayer, not a myth, a question. What you are about to encounter is a civilization that looked at the cosmos and asked why. Long before the Greeks, long before the Renaissance, long before the modern age of science. From the Rig Veda's hymns, composed as early as 1500 BCE, to the forest meditations of the Āraṇyakas, to the breathtaking philosophical fire of the Upanishads, ancient Indian thought began by observing nature. Ancient India produced one of the most intellectually prolific civilizations in human history, not merely in ritual and mythology, but in empirical science, abstract mathematics, systematic linguistics, atomistic philosophy, musical theory, and medicine. 2,500 years before calculus, 1,000 years before zero entered Europe, ancient India already knew. Kāṇāda's atoms, Mādhava's calculus, Pāṇini's formal grammar, and Āryabhaṭa's heliocentric reasoning all anticipated Western scientific developments by centuries. This was not one moment of brilliance. This was thousands of years of unbroken inquiry, from nature to ritual to contemplation to philosophy, culminating in a classical synthesis that the world has never quite seen again. And at its peak, in the ancient kingdom of Magadha, stood Nalanda, a university that drew 10,000 students, 8 centuries before Oxford existed. In this video, we will travel from the pre-Vedic fires of the Indus-Sarasvatī civilization to the towering philosophical schools of classical India.
There is a body of knowledge so ancient that its authors chose to remain nameless. They called themselves rishis, seers, and what they received, they insisted, was not composed. It was heard. Heard in the depths of meditative stillness, carried through an unbroken chain of teachers and students for thousands of years before a single letter was ever written down. This knowledge is called Suśruta, that which is heard, and it forms the bedrock of what the ancient world called Sanātana Dharma, the eternal order, the universal law that underlies all of existence. Not a religion in the Western sense, not a creed or a dogma, but a vast, living investigation into the nature of reality itself. We trace the arc of this astonishing literary and philosophical tradition, from its earliest hymns to its most luminous philosophical summits, and we ask, what were these ancient sages trying to tell us?
The oldest layer of Shruti is the Vedas, from the Sanskrit root vid, meaning to know. There are 4 of them, and together they represent a universe of knowledge assembled over centuries, perhaps between 1500 and 500 BCE, in the crucible of the Indian subcontinent. The Rig Veda is the oldest, a collection of 1,028 hymns addressed to the forces of the cosmos. Agni the fire, Indra the storm, Varuna the keeper of order, Usha the dawn. But read carefully and something deeper emerges. These are not merely prayers to weather gods. They are philosophical provocations, encounters with the mystery of existence. Consider this, from Rig Veda 10.129, the Nasadiya Sukta, the hymn of creation. It was composed roughly 3,000 years ago. The hymn ends not with an answer, but with a question. Who really knows? Who will here proclaim it? Even the gods came after this creation. Who then knows when it has arisen? That intellectual honesty, that willingness to sit with the unknown, is the signature of the Vedic mind. The Sāma Veda took the hymns of the Rig and set them to melody. It is essentially the world's oldest known songbook, composed for the priests who chanted at Vedic rituals. The Yajur Veda provided the ritual procedures, the precise formulas for offerings, for alignment with the cosmic order. And the Atharva Veda moved in a different register entirely. Practical wisdom for daily life, healing herbs, cosmological speculations, and the philosophy of time and death. Each Veda is itself divided into 4 layers, a structure that reveals how this tradition evolved over centuries. The Samhita, the core hymns, the Brahmana, the ritual commentary, the Āraṇyaka, the forest reflections, and the Upanishad, the philosophical summit. We will follow this arc, from outer ritual to inner realization.
As Vedic civilization matured, a vast body of prose literature emerged to explain the rituals encoded in the hymns. These are the Brāhmaṇas, enormously detailed manuals for the priestly class, explaining not just how to perform a sacrifice, but why each gesture, each syllable, each offering corresponds to a pattern in the cosmos. The most famous of these is the Shadapatha Brahmana, the Brahmana of 100 Paths, a text of astonishing scope that includes early accounts of creation, flood mythology, and the philosophical meaning of ritual fire. The central idea here is yajna, sacred ritual, understood not merely as offering butter into a fire, but as the fundamental act by which cosmic order, Rita, is maintained. The universe itself, these texts suggest, is an ongoing act of sacrifice and renewal. Every ritual action is a participation in that cosmic process. But a question was quietly forming in the minds of the sages. If ritual sustains the cosmos, what sustains the one performing the ritual? What is the inner fire?
The Āraṇyakas, the forest books. Between the world of the priest and the world of the philosopher, there is a transitional literature of great beauty. The Āraṇyakas, the forest books. Written for or by those who had withdrawn from householder life to dwell in the forest, the stage of life called vanaprastha, these texts begin to internalize the meaning of ritual. A fire offering in the forest, without the paraphernalia of the Vedic altar, becomes a meditation on breath, on consciousness, on the inner heat of awareness. The outer sacrifice is slowly, gracefully transformed into an inner one. This is the bridge between the karma kanda, the path of ritual action, and the jnana kanda, the path of liberating knowledge. And that bridge leads to the most luminous texts in all of Vedic literature.
The Upanishads, the summit of Vedic thought. The word Upanishad means to sit near, in devoted proximity. It evokes the image of a student sitting at the feet of a teacher in a forest hermitage at dawn, receiving knowledge that cannot be found in any book. Knowledge that must be transmitted from one awakened mind to another. Here is perhaps the most beloved prayer from the Upanishadic literature, from the Brihadesharanyaka Upanishad, still chanted at the opening of ceremonies across the world. Lead me from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death towards immortality. There are traditionally 108 Upanishads, of which 10 to 13 are considered the principal or Mukhya Upanishads. These texts, the Brihadaranyaka, the Chandogya, the Kattha, the Mundaka, the Mandukya, the Isha, represent one of the greatest philosophical achievements in human history. They gave the world some of its most radical and enduring ideas, that beneath the surface of appearances lies a single, undivided reality, that the individual self and the universal self are not ultimately separate, and that the deepest freedom available to a human being is the recognition of this identity. This teaching crystallized into 4 great utterances, the Mahāvākyas, the great sayings, one drawn from each Veda. Prajñānam Brahma, consciousness is Brahma. Aham Brahma Asmi, I am Brahman. Tat Tvam Asi, thou art that. Ayam Atma Brahma, the self is Brahman. These 4 sentences are not merely philosophical propositions. They are experiential pointers, directions for a journey inward. And the journey's destination? Mokṣa, liberation, the direct recognition of one's true nature as pure, unbounded awareness. And from the Kattha Upanishad, a dialogue between the young Nachiketa and Yama the god of death, comes this extraordinary description of the self. Subtler than the subtlest, greater than the greatest, hidden in the cave of the heart of every being. And from the Isha Upanishad, perhaps the shortest and perhaps the most complete, the very first verse declares, "And this, whatever moves in this moving world, is pervaded and enveloped by the divine." And from the Mundaka Upanishad comes the Indian national motto, Satyameva Jayat, truth alone triumphs. Women seers, Rishikas, occupy an important, though often under-discussed place in Vedic and Upanishadic literature. A Rishika was not simply a female sage. In the Vedic tradition, she was regarded as a seer of truth, someone to whom sacred insight or mantra was revealed. Their strongest textual presence is in the Vedas, especially the Rig Veda, while in the Upanishads, we see women participating as philosophers, teachers, and metaphysical interlocutors.
The word Vedānta means literally the end of the Vedas, but it means end in the sense of culmination, of summit, of purpose fulfilled. Vedānta is the philosophical synthesis that crystallized around three foundational texts: the Upanishads, the Brahma Sutras of Badarayana, and the Bhagavad Gita. Together, these form the Prasthanatrayi, the triple canon, the three departure points of Indian philosophical inquiry. From this foundation arose three great schools of interpretation. The sage Adi Sankaracharya in the 8th century CE articulated Advaita Vedānta, non-dualism. Brahman alone is real, the world is appearance, and the individual self is ultimately identical with the universal. Tradition credits Adi Sankaracharya with establishing four major mathas at Puri: Sringeri, Dwarka, and Badrinath/Jyotirmath. The mathas were not just monasteries. They were living centers of memory, philosophy, discipline, and transmission, carrying Sankara's vision of Advaita across India for more than 1,000 years. Ramanuja offered Viśiṣṭādvaita, qualified non-dualism. The world and souls are real, but real as the body of the divine. And Madhvacharya held Dvaita, dualism. The distinction between the individual soul and the supreme is eternally real. Three schools, three visions of the relationship between the self and the cosmos. And yet all three are rooted in the same soil, the Upanishadic insight that reality is not what it appears, and that the deepest question a human being can ask is not what exists, but who am I?
The profound verse, Karmanye vadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, is the most popular shloka from Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 47. Translated as, "You have the right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of your actions," this Bhagavad Gita sloka encapsulates timeless wisdom and offers profound insights into living a fulfilling and meaningful life. Yada Yada, Hi Dharmasya mantra is a sacred Sanskrit mantra honoring Lord Krishna that restores moral courage and clarifies life purpose through divine protection. This sacred mantra is Lord Krishna's eternal promise spoken to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. It declares, whenever dharma, righteousness, declines and adharma, unrighteousness, flourishes, I manifest myself on earth. The verse emphasizes that cosmic order is never abandoned. Divine intervention occurs cyclically throughout time.
Ancient India produced one of the most intellectually prolific civilizations in human history, not merely in ritual and mythology, but in empirical science, abstract mathematics, systematic linguistics, atomistic philosophy, musical theory, and medicine. Science did not emerge despite religion, but through it. Altar construction required geometry, Sulba Sutras. Ritual timing required astronomy, Vedanga Jyotisha. The sacred and empirical were inseparable. Astronomy, Jyotisha, Vedanga. Jyotisha, the oldest surviving astronomical text,
is the earliest full-fledged Indian astronomical treatise. Its purpose was calendar astronomy, fixing auspicious times for Vedic sacrifices, yajnas, by tracking nakshatra, lunar mansion positions, solstices, and a 5-year yuga cycle. Āryabhaṭa composed the Āryabhaṭa at age 23. He proposed that the Earth rotates on its axis, calculated the sidereal day as 23 hours, 56 minutes, 4.1 seconds, and correctly attributed solar and lunar eclipses to shadow geometry rather than mythological demons. Brahmagupta, in his Brahmasputra Siddhanta, refined planetary position formulas and introduced discussions on gravity. The Kerala school astronomer Nilakantha Somayaji proposed a partially heliocentric model for Mercury and Venus, the most accurate until Kepler in the 17th century.
Mathematics, Ganita. Ancient Indian mathematicians expressed theorems and algorithms entirely in Sanskrit verse, shloka/sutra, a memory technology that made advanced mathematics transmissible across generations without written notation. Sulba Sutras, Geometry before Pythagoras, 800 BCE, contains the earliest known statement of what the West calls the Pythagorean theorem, predating Pythagoras by at least 200 years. Āryabhaṭa. Āryabhaṭa's value of pi was accurate to 4 decimal places, and he notably used the Sanskrit word asana, approximated, hinting at an understanding that pi is irrational. He constructed the first known trigonometric sine table and introduced the terms jya, sine, and kojya, cosine, terms that traveled through Arabic as jiba and were later Latinized into sinus, giving us the modern word sine. Brahmagupta was the first mathematician to formally define 0 as a number and lay down arithmetic rules for it, as well as establishing rules for negative numbers, foundational to all subsequent mathematics. Mādhava and the Kerala school, precursors to calculus. Mādhava derived infinite series expansions for sine, cosine, and arctangent, anticipating Newton and Leibniz by nearly 2 centuries. His series for pi, now called the Mādhava-Gregory-Leibniz series, was the first rigorous infinite series expression for pi. Astronomy, Jyotisha. Physics and metaphysics, Viśiṣṭādvaita/Nyaya. Kāṇāda's atomic theory, 600 BCE, proposed that all matter is composed of paramanu, atoms, indivisible, eternal, and indestructible particles. Atoms of the same substance combine to form dvianuka, diatomic molecules, and trianuka, triatomic molecules. While metaphysical rather than experimental, this systematic atomism preceded Dalton's atomic theory by approximately 2,500 years.
Linguistics, Vyakarana. Pāṇini's Ashtadhyayi, the world's first generative grammar, 500 to 400 BCE, is arguably the most remarkable intellectual achievement in the history of linguistics. Written in a compressed metalanguage that modern computer scientists recognize as structurally equivalent to a formal grammar or programming language. Pāṇini's grammar effectively functioned as a language machine. Feed in root and suffix of any Sanskrit word, follow the rules, and obtain a grammatically correct output, anticipating formal language theory by 2,000+ years. Music theory, Sangita Shastra. Natya Shastra, the Encyclopedia of Performing Arts, circa 200 BCE to 200 CE, is the world's most comprehensive ancient treatise on music, dance, and drama. It introduced the concept of rasa, 9 emotional essences, navarasas, that art must evoke, which became the foundation of all Indian aesthetics. Key verse. Rasa arises from the combination of vibhava, stimulus, anubhava, response, and vyabhichari bhava, transient emotions.
Medicine, Ayurveda, and surgery. Charaka Samhita and Suśruta Samhita, foundations of ancient medicine. Charaka, circa 100 BCE to 200 CE, regarded as the father of Indian medicine, authored the Charaka Samhita, a systematic text on internal medicine covering embryology, Garbha Vigyan, disease pathology, and the three dosha theory, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. Suśruta, circa 600 BCE, the father of surgery, authored the Suśruta Samhita, the oldest surgical text detailing over 300 surgical procedures and 100+ surgical instruments. He pioneered rhinoplasty, nasal reconstruction using a skin flap from the cheek, a technique still referenced as the Indian flap in modern surgical literature. The text enumerates instruments including yantra, blunt instruments, shastra, sharp instruments, and karma, surgical procedures, classifying surgeries into 8 categories called Ashtavida Shastra Karma.
The Vedas did not freeze. From the Upanishadic spring flowed the great rivers of Sanātana Dharma's continuing revelation. The 18 Mahapuranas, vast encyclopedias of cosmology and devotion, the Agamas, the liturgical and yogic scriptures of Shaiva and Vaishnava tradition, the Itihasas, the Ramayana and the Mahāvākyas, within which the Bhagavad Gita blazes like a diamond. Each generation did not discard the previous one, it deepened it. This tradition is not a museum. It is a living conversation, one that has continued without interruption for 3,000 to 4,000 years, and which continues today in universities and monasteries, in morning prayers and evening meditations, in the questions of a child and the silence of a sage. The rishis who first heard these truths left us one final invitation. It comes from the opening hymn of the Rig Veda's first book. Not from one tradition, not from one teacher, from all directions. That openness, that radical intellectual hospitality, is perhaps the deepest teaching of Sanātana Dharma. The search for truth has no boundary, and it begins, as it always has, in the willingness to listen.
Dharma is a Sanskrit concept meaning the cosmic order, inherent duty, right conduct, and the underlying law that sustains all existence. It is simultaneously ethical, natural, and metaphysical, deeply personal to one's role and station in life. Religion, by contrast, religion is a Western origin term referring to an organized system of belief, worship, and doctrine centered on a deity or creed, making Dharma far broader and more fluid than any single religion, as it encompasses law, ethics, ecology, and the very fabric of reality itself.
India's greatest challenge today is not only development, but livable development. Clean air, safe water, dignified cities, healthy children, meaningful jobs, and civic responsibility. Air pollution and environmental degradation. This is one of India's biggest silent killers. Air pollution contributes to heart disease, stroke, lung disease, reduced productivity, and poor childhood development. India has many of the world's most polluted cities, and PM 2.5 exposure remains far above WHO guideline levels in several regions. Water stress, groundwater depletion, and unsafe water. India's cities and villages depend heavily on groundwater, but over-extraction, contamination, weak recharge, and climate variability are worsening scarcity. Recent reporting on government groundwater assessments highlights severe urban groundwater stress in several metros. Urban civic breakdown. Waste, sanitation, drainage, roads, and public spaces. Rapid urbanization has outpaced city planning. Many towns struggle with garbage collection, open dumping, flooding, broken footpaths, weak drainage, poor street lighting, and unsafe roads. These are daily dignity issues, not just infrastructure problems. Public health and nutrition gaps. India has improved, but child malnutrition remains high. NFHS 5 reported under 5 stunting at 35.5%, wasting at 19.3%, and underweight at 32.1%. This affects learning, immunity, productivity, and long-term national development. employment quality, youth unemployment, and skills mismatch. The problem is not only unemployment, it is also underemployment, low-quality jobs, informal work, and a mismatch between education and employable skills. The ILO IHT India Employment Report 2024 specifically frames youth employment, education, and skills as a central challenge. Road safety and civic discipline. India loses a staggering number of people on roads each year. In 2024, pedestrians and two-wheeler riders made up nearly 67% of road fatalities, about 1.28 lakh deaths, according to reporting on the Ministry of Road Transport data. This reflects weak road design, enforcement gaps, unsafe driving, and poor pedestrian infrastructure. From problem to progress, making a stronger India is our Dharma.
The closest synonyms for Dharma in English are righteousness and ethics. Dharmo rakshati rakshita is a popular Sanskrit phrase mentioned in the Mahāvākyas and Manusmriti, verse 8.15. It can be loosely translated as Dharma protects those who protect it. If this journey has sparked something in you, subscribe to join us as we explore these teachings further, and leave your question in the comments below. What aspect of this ancient wisdom would you like to explore next?